Okay, I'm doing the 2009 absorption question, which is question 8 in 2009. What I've laid out here are the different overheads I'm going to have to share out. I'm going to have to come out with the overhead absorption rate for each department. I'll have to calculate the selling price, and then we can talk a little bit about the theory at the end. So my indirect materials and labour, I don't have to apportion them because I'm given the totals and everything else. So let's see, 360 is the total there. Now our departments, so we have processing, we have assembly, and we have finishing. So they're already allocated out, 170, 100,000 and 90,000. The other then is 500,000, and that's divided into 300,000, 120,000 and 80,000. So machine maintenance, I have to share out 28,000, 80,000, 70,000, 64,000 and 50,000. And I have to come up with a suitable basis for apportioning out those costs. So machine maintenance, based on the information I'm given over here, I'm given floor space, something to do with machines, and I can see machine hours. So it's 40, 30 and 10. Well, then that's probably the easiest way to do it. So machine is the basis of apportionment. So 40 over 80, which is half of the 28 grand, so that's 14 grand. Goes to the processing one. Then 30 out of 80, okay, so that's 3/8, so it's going to be 28 grand times 3 over 8. And then the other one is 10 over 8, okay, it's machine hours, so that's going to be 28 grand divided by 8, so it's 1/8 of it, 3.5 grand. Plant depreciation, it's got to have to be something to do with the amount of plant, so we've got plant valuation. So 300, 150 and 50, so that's easy enough. Remember, this is all meant to be based on common sense. So if you had decided instead of using plant, you could have maybe used floor space, but I think no, plant is the most suitable one, so you'd probably lose marks if you didn't use that. So we're going to have 80 grand times, we had 300 over 5, so it's going to be times 3/5. The other one then is going to be 80 grand times 150 over 500, so it's going to be 150 over 500. That's my fraction, or 3. So that would be 3, whatever it is, 3/10. And then the last one then is 50 grand over 500, so that's 10%. So it's going to be 80 grand times 0.1, 10%. Light and heat. Light and heat, I could have gone volume, number of employees, maybe, okay. I could have maybe done machine hours, but I'm going to use, let's say, volume for the hell of it, okay. Now, if you use a different one, you may end up with a slightly different figure, but it shouldn't make a difference to the overall marks once you've used common sense sharing it out. So 70 grand times the volume, 24 over 42. Then the next one is 70 grand times 12 over 42. And then the last one is going to be 70 grand times 6 over 42. Rent and rates, well, that really should be based on floor space. So rent and rates, floor space is 8 over 16, 5 over 16 and 3 over 16. So it's going to be that times a half, which is 8 over 16, and then that times, what is it, 5 over 16, so 5 over 16 and then the total overheads times 3 over 16. Factory canteen, will that be based on the number of employees? So we have 60, 30 and 10. So it'll be that number times 60%, the overheads times 30%, and the overheads times 10%. So there's my total amount of overheads. And I need to share those overheads out among my 3 departments based on whatever the dominant activity is. So I've basically done part A, that's the overhead absorbed. B, the overhead absorption rate, so I'm doing that here now. And I'll need to choose the basis for apportionment. What's the main activity in each department? So the processing department. The main activity, I'm looking at either labour hours or machine hours. So the processing department seems to be very much labour hours, lots of labour hours, lots of machine hours. I think it's a larger fraction of the cost as labour hours, so I'm going to base that one on labour hours. The next one, let's see, the assembly department. 30 as a fraction of 80 compared to 35 as a fraction of that. So I think it's going to have to be based on machine hours. And then the finishing department is 10 as a fraction of 8, so an eighth as opposed to 25. So I think I based that on machine hours. Okay, so the overhead is 634. The overhead here is the 2195, and the overhead here. So now I need to find, in this case, the number of hours. In this case, it's labour hours. So this is the total amount of labour hours. So we have 80,000 labour hours here in the processing department. Now I need to know the total number of machine hours. So 30,000 and then 10,000. And then 10,000. So the rate then is going to be 634, which is the overheads, divided by the hours, and that's per labour hour. This one here then is the overheads divided by the total number of machine hours, which we said over here was 30. That gives us that figure there, and that's per machine hour. And then the overheads divided by the total number of machine hours is that. So I'm going to make the question a bit easier for myself. I'm just going to round these off to the nearest 2 decimal points. Okay, so when I'm working out now the selling price of the job, also I need to label that, and that one is per machine hour. So how all of this works is when I'm pricing up any job, if somebody comes in to see me and say, I want you to price up this particular job for me, I'll know that aside from whatever I'm going to spend on materials and whatever I'm going to spend for labour in each department, I'm also going to need to find out how many labour hours in the processing department that are going to be involved in this particular job and multiply that by 7.93. The number of machine hours in the assembly department, multiply that by 7.32. And the number of machine hours in the finishing department, multiply by 20.85. That's going to give me how much of all of these overhead figures here are going to be shared out to each job. Okay, so we're working out the selling price of job number 510. So it's just a mistake there with that. So that's job number 510. So we have processing, assembly, and finishing. So the number of materials, am I given it? Yes, I'm given the materials. I don't need to do any calculations here. So the amount of materials, we have 10,000 and 2,400 in the assembly department, and 0 the last department. So that's going to be 12,400 is the total amount of materials. So let's go and look at our labour. So processing and finishing. So, okay, again, no calculations needed. 2,000 euros of labour, 4,600 of labour in the assembly department, and 800 in the finishing department. So we add all those three figures together, and that gives a total amount of labour. So now, this is the bit that does cause problems for people. I just realised I need to bring these up one. Okay, so this is processing. So the processing now, I know it's going to be based on labour, so we're going to have 7.93 multiplied by the number of, so 7.93, that's the rate, multiplied by the number of labour hours involved in this particular job that we're doing. So the labour hours in this job for the processing department is 50. So the absorption rate we have above multiplied by the 50 labour hours. The second one then is going to be 7.32 multiplied by, it says here machine hours, so go over here, the number of machine hours in that department is 30. So it's the absorption rate times 30, because it's 30 machine hours. And the last one is also based on machine hours, so it'll be 20.85 multiplied by how many machine hours? 6. So the overhead absorption rate multiplied by 6 hours. So there's a total figure. So these three are the share of the overheads of each department apportioned to this particular job. So the total cost is going to be adding up all three of these, so that will be materials, labour and overheads. That's the total cost of the job, 20,000, okay? Now I need to work out my profit. In this case, the profit margin is 25%. So in terms of the percentages, the profit is 25%. That means the selling price is, because it's a margin, that's the profit compared to selling price, the selling price must be 100%, which means the total cost must be 75%. So if I divide this number by 75, I'll get 1%, and if I then multiply by 25, I'll get 25%, which is the profit margin. So the profit is that number. Now let's just, we're going to divide it first by 75. So that gives me 1%, and I'm going to multiply the answer by 25. So that's our profit, and we add that on to our cost, and that gives us our selling price, 27,000. Okay. What is meant by step fixed costs? So that's a cost which is fixed over a range of production. For example, rent. That our rent is fixed between, let's say, making 0 and 10,000 units. After 10,000, we have to hire a bigger factory, so it will increase, and it will then be a new higher figure, which might go from 10,000 to 50,000 units. And two differences between management and financial accounting. Financial accounting is trading profit and loss and balance sheet. So it gives us, it looks at previous figures to suggest if we're doing well or badly. Management accounting, the main thing about management accounting is it helps us plan for the future, helps us run our business, helps us decide on things like prices. So it helps us make future decisions. So it's very much future based. Okay, I hope that makes a bit of sense.